The night everything collapsed began with the sound of a deadbolt sliding into place. I heard it from the outside, standing on the porch while cold rain hammered my skin. My name is Nora Bennett, and on the night of my husband Evan's birthday, he locked me out of our home as if I were a stranger at the wrong door. Through the window I saw him laughing beside Melanie Cross, the woman he had invited into our marriage long before he dared say affair. They cut cake together while I stood in the storm, soaked and shaking. I pressed my hand to the glass and whispered his name, but the music swallowed every sound I made. My knees ached, my teeth chattered, and humiliation settled over me like a wet coat. I thought that was the lowest moment of my life. Then headlights swept across the driveway. A black Cadillac Escalade turned in slowly. The back door opened and my grandmother, Evelyn Hartman, stepped out. I had always believed she lived in a small town in Georgia. When she saw me drenched and trembling, she looked at the house, then back at me and spoke 3 words that changed everything. Tear it apart. Before that night, I used to believe my marriage had cracks, not fractures. I met Evan Bennett in college, back when we both worked part-time jobs and dreamed about a future that felt too far away to touch. He was charming in a restless way, always talking about the life he would build once he caught his big break. I loved that about him. I loved a lot of things about him then. When we married, I put my degree aside to support his ambitions. I worked long hours in small offices, in cafes, in whatever place would hire me, while he chased opportunity after opportunity. I did not mind. I believed we were building something together, one brick at a time. When his business finally took off, he promised my turn would come next. It never did. The more money he made, the more invisible I became. Somewhere between meetings, business trips, and new friends with tailored suits, Evan stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as someone who kept the house running. His mother, Lorraine Bennett, did not help. She reminded me often that Evan had married below his potential and that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection he tossed my way. Still, I held on. I believed people grew through difficult seasons. I believed commitment meant staying even when love felt thin. I believed Evan was still the man who once held my hand under cheap cafeteria lights and told me he could not imagine a life without me. But eventually I learned that some seasons are not meant to be endured. Some storms are warnings. Evan's birthday had always been a simple celebration, something we used to mark with takeout food and a movie on the couch. But this year was different. His business had grown, his network had expanded, and he wanted a party that matched the image he worked so hard to project. So for days I prepared the house, hired the catering team, arranged flowers, ironed linens, and made sure every detail looked effortless, even though nothing about it was easy. I told myself it was worth it, that maybe this time he would see how much I still cared. The house buzzed with laughter that night. Guests arrived in designer coats, carrying expensive bottles of wine. The chandelier in the foyer cast a warm glow over everything, making the room look like something out of a magazine. But Evan barely glanced at me as he moved around greeting people. When someone asked who I was, he brushed it off with a half smile and said, "She keeps everything running." It was the first sign that something was wrong, but I swallowed the sting and kept going, placing trays, refilling glasses, maintaining a smile that felt tighter each minute. I was carrying a stack of plates when the room shifted. Conversations dimmed, and eyes drifted toward the front door. I turned just in time to see Melanie Cross walk in, dressed in a sequin gown that clung to her like it had been custom-made. Her hair fell in soft waves, her lips were painted in the kind of red that demanded attention, and from the look on her face, she knew she owned the room. Evan's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. His posture straightened, his smile widened, and he left his business partners mid-sentence to greet her. Melanie wrapped her arms around him like she belonged there, like her place beside him was unquestioned. Guests watched with a blend of surprise and curiosity, and his mother, Lorraine, beamed with approval. She reached for Melanie as if welcoming a long-lost daughter, showering her with compliments about her beauty, her elegance, her potential. I stood off to the side, holding the plates against my chest, feeling the truth press down on me. The way Melanie leaned into him, the way Evan looked at her, the way Lorraine glowed in her presence, none of it belonged to coincidence. None of it was innocent. Evan had not just invited another woman to his birthday party. He had invited her into my home, into a space I built, into a life I sacrificed for. And he expected me to stand there and pretend nothing was wrong. I tried to steady my breathing as I set the plates down, but the knot in my chest tightened with every second. I approached Evan and Melanie, determined at least to hear the truth from his own lips. When I said his name, he did not even turn fully toward me. He looked irritated, as if I had interrupted a moment I had no right to witness. "Why is she here, Ivan?" I asked, my voice thin but steady. "Why is she acting as if she lives in this house?" Melanie let out a soft laugh, the kind people use when they want to make you feel small. "Relax, Nora," she said. "I am just here to celebrate the man I care about. You do not need to be so tense." The room held its breath. Evan's jaw tightened. "Do not start, Nora, not tonight. You always make everything heavier than it needs to be." I stared at him, feeling heat rise behind my eyes, but I did not back down. "This is our home. I am your wife. She needs to leave." The word wife finally snapped something inside him. He grabbed my wrist with more force than necessary and hissed, "You are ruining my night." Before I could respond, he dragged me through the foyer, past guests pretending not to stare, and toward the front door. Rain battered the window so loudly it sounded like gravel. He flung the door open, cold wind bursting into my face. "If you cannot accept Melanie, then you do not belong here tonight." "Evan, please," I said, reaching for him. He stepped back. "Make your choice." Then, without waiting for an answer, he shoved me outside and slammed the door. The deadbolt clicked into place a second later, sealing the moment like a verdict. I stood alone on the porch, trembling under the storm, while laughter resumed inside the home I no longer recognized. The storm only grew heavier as the minutes dragged by. Rain soaked through my dress, down my neck, into my shoes. Each gust of wind felt like it was pushing me closer to the edge of something I was afraid to name. I circled around the side of the house and looked through the living room window. Inside, Evan stood beside Melanie as they cut the first slice of cake. He looked warm, dry, and content, smiling the same way he once smiled only for me. My hand rested against the glass. It was cold, matching the numbness moving through my body. I wanted to scream, to force the window open, to remind them that I was still his wife, still the woman who held him up when he had nothing. But exhaustion pulled at me like a weight. I sank down onto the stone steps, hugging my arms to my chest as the rain blurred everything. I do not know how long I sat there before headlights cut through the storm. A black Cadillac Escalade rolled up the driveway, its engine steady against the thunder. The back door opened, and a man in a tailored suit stepped out holding an umbrella. He moved to the other side of the vehicle and opened the rear door. That was when she appeared. My grandmother, Evelyn Hartman, stepped out with the poise of someone who had never been rushed a day in her life. She was supposed to be miles away in a quiet Georgia town, tending to her garden and living on a modest pension. At least, that was what she let everyone believe. Her coat was heavy wool, her posture straight, her eyes sharp as they swept across the property. When she saw me slumped on the steps, drenched and shaking, her expression darkened. She knelt just enough to lift my chin, studying my face the way only someone who has loved you since birth can. "What did they do to you, sweetheart?" she whispered. Then she stood, looked at the house glowing with party lights, and spoke to the men who had followed her. "Tear it apart." The moment those 3 words left my grandmother's lips, the men beside her straightened with a quiet, unquestioning discipline. They moved toward the front door with purposeful strides, their coats whipping in the wind. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It was as if they had been waiting for this command all along. The first man reached the door and delivered a single, powerful kick. The wood cracked, the hinges bent, and the door flew open with a thunderous crash that silenced the entire party inside. Guests froze mid-laugh, mid-sip, mid-sentence. The sudden gust of cold rain swept into the foyer, scattering napkins and chilling the warm air. Evan stumbled forward, wide-eyed. "What is going on? Who are you people? You cannot just break into my house." But his words died the second my grandmother stepped inside. Evelyn Hartman walked beneath the chandelier, as if she already owned the room. Rain dripped from her umbrella onto the expensive rug, but she did not seem to care. Her gaze swept the space, taking in every guest, every decoration, every sign of Evan's self-indulgence. Behind her, the men moved quickly. One shoved over the towering birthday cake, sending tiers of frosting and fondant crashing across the marble floor. Another yanked the tablecloth from the buffet table, sending crystal dishes and silver platters shattering in every direction. The floral arch collapsed under a forceful pull, scattering petals like torn pages. Screams rose from the guests, who scrambled for the exit, tripping over one another as they fled. Chairs toppled. Glass cracked underfoot. The beautiful party that had taken days to prepare unraveled in minutes. Evan lunged toward one of the men. "Stop. You cannot do this. This is my home. I will call the police." My grandmother lifted a single hand, silencing him more effectively than any yell could have. She motioned to the leather folder her assistant carried. He placed it on the coffee table, opened it, and revealed a stack of documents thick enough to anchor a ship. "This is not your home," Evelyn said calmly. Her voice carried through the chaos with chilling clarity. "This property, along with the vehicles and several assets you parade around town, belongs to Hudson Enterprises, my company. And you, Evan, have violated every agreement you ever signed." Lorraine, who had been clinging to Melanie moments before, gasped and pressed a hand to her chest. Evan's face drained of color as he flipped through the papers. The signatures, the financial records, the proof of misuse. It all stared back at him, undeniable. And in that instant the house he proudly claimed as his own began slipping from his hands forever. Evan kept shaking his head as he flipped through the pages, refusing to believe what every line clearly showed. "These documents are fake," he said, voice cracking. "You cannot take my house. You cannot take everything I built." My grandmother did not flinch. "Evan, you built nothing. You used money that was never yours. You used my company's funds to impress people who would not cross the street for you if you lost it all." Lorraine stepped forward, trembling. "Evelyn, please, this is a misunderstanding. We had no idea who you really were. If we had known." My grandmother cut her off with a single glance. "That was the point. You were never meant to know." Melanie slowly backed away toward the side door, clutching her clutch bag as if it contained her entire future. One of the men intercepted her and turned the bag upside down on a nearby table. Out tumbled Lorraine's jewelry and several items that did not belong to her. Melanie's face went pale. Lorraine gasped, pointing at her. "Thief, I welcomed you into my home." My grandmother tapped her cane once against the floor. "Enough. All of you, listen carefully. From this moment on, you do not live here. You do not drive the cars parked outside. You do not touch anything inside this home. Everything you have used to elevate yourselves was paid for with funds you had no right to." She checked her watch. "You have 10 minutes to leave. No bags, no suitcases, nothing but the clothes on your backs." Evan stared at her in disbelief. "You cannot be serious. You cannot just throw us out into the storm." My grandmother lowered her voice, the calm almost more frightening than anger. "You threw my granddaughter out into the storm tonight. You made that choice. Now live with it." Two men stepped forward, guiding Evan, Lorraine, and Melanie toward the door as they begged, argued, and clawed for anything they could hold. But nothing stopped the inevitable. The door opened, the rain roared in, and they were pushed out into the cold, exactly as Evan had done to me only an hour earlier. The storm did not let up as Evan, Lorraine, and Melanie stood outside soaked and stunned. Rain plastered their clothes to their skin, washing away whatever pride they still clung to. Melanie wrapped her arms around herself, shivering, mascara streaking down her cheeks. She looked at Evan the way someone looks at a sinking ship they never intended to stay on. A taxi passed by at the end of the street. Melanie bolted toward it without hesitation. Evan tried to follow, reaching for her arm, but she pulled away. "I am not going down with you," she said. "Everything I wanted is behind that door, not beside you." Then she climbed in and slammed the door, leaving Evan calling her name in the rain. When she was gone, Evan patted his jacket pockets, searching for the emergency cash he always carried. His movements slowed as reality hit him. Melanie had taken it. The little he had left was now gone with her. By morning, the three of them were exhausted, freezing, and desperate. Evan tried to salvage some dignity by heading to his office at Hudson Enterprises. He straightened his damp shirt and walked into the lobby, expecting at least one familiar face to offer sympathy. Instead, 2 security guards stepped in front of him. "Sir, you are not allowed inside." He scoffed. "I am a director. Move, now." The guard shook his head. "Not anymore. Your termination notice was issued this morning. All your access has been revoked." Evan demanded proof. The receptionist pointed to a memo posted on the wall behind her. His name was printed there beside the words "terminated immediately and not authorized to enter." Employees passing by glanced at him with thinly veiled curiosity. Some whispered. Some looked away. No one offered help. He left and ran to the bank next. Surely he still had money in his personal account. But the teller pulled up his information and frowned. "Sir, your accounts have been frozen under a court order due to ongoing investigation. You cannot withdraw any funds at this time." Evan stepped back from the counter, dizzy. The floor felt unstable beneath him. Everything he relied on, his job, his savings, his image, had vanished in less than a day. He returned to the alley where Lorraine waited on a bench, clutching her purse like a lifeline. She looked up with hopeful eyes that dimmed the moment she saw his face. No money, no job, no home, and no one left to blame but himself. While Evan's world unraveled, mine began to rebuild in ways I never expected. My grandmother brought me to her estate, a quiet property surrounded by oak trees and long winding paths. The moment I stepped inside, the warmth felt almost unreal. Soft lights, clean linens, the scent of lavender drifting through the halls. It was the first time in years I felt a home wrap around me instead of drain me. But my grandmother did not bring me there just to rest. She led me into her study the next morning, a room lined with shelves of leather-bound files and framed documents from decades of business history. "This is where your life changes," she said. I frowned. "Grandma, I do not understand." She smiled gently. "Sweetheart, Hudson Enterprises was always meant to be yours one day. I kept my distance so you could build a life on your own terms. But now it is time you know what you are capable of." What followed were days filled with lessons I never imagined learning. She taught me how to read financial reports, how to negotiate contracts, how to identify hidden weaknesses in a deal. At first I felt overwhelmed, but with every passing day, something inside me straightened. I was not just healing, I was growing. My appearance changed with me. I traded worn cardigans for tailored blazers, soft dresses for structured ones that made me feel grounded. My hair fell neatly around my shoulders instead of being tied in a quick knot before rushing to cook dinner. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a version of myself I had forgotten I could be. The first time I walked into Hudson Enterprises as the future leader, employees stood when I passed. Not because of fear but respect. For the first time, I stood in a place of power without apologizing for taking up space. I was not just leaving my old life behind, I was stepping fully into the one that should have always been mine. Evan showed up at the Hudson Enterprises building 2 weeks later, looking thinner, tired, and far older than the man who once strutted through boardrooms with unearned confidence. He stood in front of the glass doors, clutching the last bit of hope he had left. When the receptionist asked if he needed assistance, he straightened his shoulders and said, "I am here to see my wife." Security was called before he even finished the sentence. 3 guards approached, firm but not unkind, and told him he needed to leave the property. Evan protested, raising his voice, insisting that Nora would want to see him. His words echoed through the lobby, drawing curious glances from employees passing by. Just then the front doors opened, my car pulled up, and I stepped out with my work folder in hand. I was heading back from a meeting, focused on the tasks ahead, when I heard someone call my name. "Nora, please, it is me." My steps slowed. I looked up and saw him between the guards. His clothes were worn, his eyes desperate. For a moment, silence stretched between us. The man who once dismissed me now stood pleading, reaching for a future that no longer existed. I gave a small nod, an acknowledgement of a chapter closed, then turned toward the entrance. The guards guided him back as I walked inside, the doors closing between us like the final line of a story that had already ended. I saw Evan one last time a week later, though not by accident. I went to him. My grandmother insisted I did not owe him anything, but I felt the need to finish the story myself, so I traveled to the rundown alley where he and Lorraine had been living. The air smelled of damp concrete and old cooking grease. Their belongings sat in plastic bags along the wall. Evan stepped out of the room when he heard footsteps. For a second, he looked hopeful, as if he expected me to offer forgiveness, maybe even a way back. Lorraine appeared behind him, her posture hunched, her voice trembling as she said my name like a plea. I held out a large envelope. "These are the divorce papers, Evan. I want this process over quickly. There is nothing left between us to repair." Lorraine reached for my hand. "Honey, please," she whispered. "We made mistakes. Families can fix things. Do not do this." I pulled my hand back gently. A family protects one another. A family does not lock someone out in the cold to make room for a stranger. What you are asking for is not forgiveness, it is comfort. I placed a smaller envelope on a nearby chair. There is some money in there, not alimony or support, just enough for medicine and food for a few days. After that, I wish you well, but I will not return. Evan stared at the papers, realization settling over him like another kind of storm. I turned and walked away, my steps steady, leaving the past exactly where it belonged. Rain returned the very next day, a steady curtain falling over the city, as if the sky itself had something to let go of. Evan and Lorraine huddled beneath the narrow awning of a closed shop, their belongings piled beside them in plastic bags. Wind pushed at their clothes, soaking the edges, chilling the air around them. They looked smaller than I had ever seen them, no longer the people who once filled rooms with demands and opinions. A line of traffic crept along the street, and through the blur of water on the pavement, a familiar black Rolls-Royce slowed as it passed. Inside, I sat beside my grandmother, a warm blanket across my lap and a cup of tea in my hands. We were talking softly about a new housing project Hudson Enterprises planned to launch, something that would make life better for families who had never been given a chance. For a brief moment, the car paused at the light. Evan looked up, eyes widening when he recognized the vehicle. He stood, stepping forward as if the rain no longer mattered. But I did not look his way. I did not need to. Some chapters close quietly, not with anger, but with understanding that they no longer deserve space in your story. The light changed, the car moved on, and the distance between the past and the future widened until it felt unreachable. Pain teaches, storms redefine, but the most powerful change happens when you finally choose yourself. If you connected with this story, take a moment to like, share, and comment below. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and I would love to hear where you are watching from. Thank you for being here. Until the next story.